My name is Byron Hookey. I flew the A-1 Skyraider from 13 October 1971 to 13 October 1972 as a first lieutenant with the 1st Special Operations Squadron at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand.
Is there a mission that stands out in your mind, something that was special or exciting that you could share with us? One of those ones that really just brought home what the war was about for you?
Certainly. As a Sandy pilot, once I was checked out as a flight lead, I had an opportunity to fly several search and rescue missions, both in Laos and in North Vietnam. One particular search and rescue mission that I remember that I played a significant role in was the rescue of one of our fellow Sandy pilots, Sandy 7, Captain Larry Highfill, who was, at the time he was shot down, conducting a search and rescue for a Navy F-8 Crusader pilot who had been shot down. So all of a sudden, instead of one person down, there were two. I entered the scenario as a wingman coming out of Nakhon Phanom, Thailand on the 20th of June in 1972, flying on the wing of another lieutenant. We were potentially going to go to Da Nang to replace the Da Nang Sandy flyers that had been put up in the air on the SAR. So they wanted to replace the ground alert with the two of us. But as we approached the search and rescue area, we were monitoring the radios. We listened and heard on the SAR frequency Sandy 7 saying on the radio that, "Hey, I've been hit, I'm getting out," and that was all it was. He had been hit by a 23 millimeter battery, and his wingman, First Lieutenant Tim Brady, watched him jump out and then began to conduct the initial stages of a search and rescue missions. One of the most important rules we had, and one that we did not violate, was if there's more than one man on the ground, you go for the one that's on the ground most recently, for the reason being that the longer someone's on the ground, the more time the enemy has to move toward that site and potentially capture them before the rescue forces can arrive. And in this situation, that meant that the other pilot that was already shot down, his call sign was Nickel 102, he no longer was the objective of the search and rescue mission because of that rule of the most recent shoot down is the priority. Plus we had helicopters with us, so theoretically it should have been an easy task to go in and snatch him up before he'd been on the ground too long. But I specifically remember as we're approaching the search and rescue area, now our mission was not to go to Da Nang, was to go to the search and rescue area, which was about halfway between Da Nang and our home base of Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, perhaps an hour flying time maximum. So this all happened pretty quickly. One of the problems we had initially was that the radio frequency guard channel, which is the universal channel that any airplane in distress can use to announce that he's got a problem and needs assistance. And the Navy was on guard channel because the Navy F-8 pilot and his squadron members who were attempting to help in the rescue were on guard. And in the Air Force, we have a saying that guard is simply Navy common. That's what they tend to use a lot, half jokingly, but in this case it was a serious situation. They were preventing the use of that frequency for search and rescue on the other pilots, so we politely asked that they cease their discussions and leave frequency, and we moved also the SAR to a different frequency. We have 4 possible frequencies that we can use based on the survival radio that every pilot that flies over there has a survival radio with guard and 3 other frequencies that we can use to run the SAR on. So we moved the search to a different frequency and were able to proceed with the operation. Well, the first thing that happened as we entered the area, there was quite a heavy cloud cover, middle to broken clouds at about 4,000 feet above the ground. Some of them were cumulus buildup, so we had to circumnavigate those. in order to get to the SAR area. As we began to do a comm search for the pilot, and that's the term we use to start calling on the radio to see if the pilot that has been shot down is on the frequency yet, we quickly discovered that we had broken contact and we couldn't talk to him very well. So we spent about 20 minutes attempting to get him to come up on frequency. And just about that time, my flight lead, First Lieutenant Joe Seitz, reported that his engine was running rough and that he was having problems and felt like he needed to go back, land as soon as he could. And in this case, it was to Da Nang, because we were closer to Da Nang Air Base, which is on the coast of South Vietnam, not very far from where the search and rescue operation was occurring, which was actually in A Shau Valley. A Shau Valley being significant because that is the valley in which Bernie Fisher, the A-1 pilot in 1966, landed his A-1E two-seat Skyraider and rescued his fellow squadron member that had been shot down, crash-landed on A Shau Airfield, as the helicopter was not going to be able to come in quickly enough, so Major Fisher decided to land his Skyraider. He did so under fire from the enemy, took off, and had the survivor on board. So for that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. And I remember thinking about that as I was approaching the target area, saying, well, I'm in a single-seater, so there's not any way I'm going to do that. Not that I would have anyway, but so it did enter my mind because I was aware of that mission that had happened so many years earlier. So now my leader has got some engine problems. We had the two Skyraiders that were out of Da Nang orbiting off of the coast. They moved in and escorted Lieutenant Seitz back to Da Nang, and for whatever reason, to this day I don't remember why it happened. I stayed out alone without a wingman, which typically we did not do. We always operated in pairs. So I continued to conduct a search for Sandy 7, Larry Heifel, and I decided to cross the A Shau Valley to get onto the eastern side of the valley and then work south. And as soon as I did that, I realized I had much better radio contact, and I was actually able to talk to him very well. And he directed me. He said he could hear me, and I flew over him. And then I did locate him. Saw his parachute sitting on the side of the eastern slope of A Shau Valley. Not a significantly steep slope, but steep enough that it was difficult for him to move. And so I said, well, it looks like you're in a good place. You stay right where you are. And he did that. About this time, I started taking ground fire from a bombed out bomb crater above him on the ridge, perhaps 150 meters away. And I could see that there was an enemy soldier with a rifle that was there was a log across the bomb crater, and he was using that as a rest and aiming stabilization, and was firing at me as I would fly over. So I remember reaching down and turning on the Su-11 minigun pod on another pass. I kept my eyes on him as I came around, and I solved the problem by not emptying the gun, but it's 6,000 rounds per minute minigun, so I fired a good 2 or 3 second burst and neutralized that threat. So that was one of the necessary things we had to do, is continue to watch. Now, since I'm alone, I don't have someone else looking out, so this was the risk that I took in doing this. But I did locate him, identified his position, and then I ended up out in the valley over the flat part, and this is presumably where Larry was shot down. And suddenly I looked down and I saw multiple muzzle flashes from large caliber AAA with tracer rounds coming up toward me, and I broke hard to the left, did in effect a descending 270-degree turn to the left, armed up my two Lao 3 rocket pods, each with 19 high explosive rocket warheads on it. And I emptied those on the site of the AAA piece, and didn't hang around to see whether I was successful. I just emptied the Su-11, the Lao 3 pods, and I believe I did strike close enough that they ceased firing. Never heard from that gun site again. So that was something that got my attention, got my pulse going a little bit quicker, and so now I know we're not playing games here. We got some serious business to do and a lot of work to get Larry out. And at this point in time, we're only about an hour before sunset, so it's the light is getting dimmer with the clouds, and so it's a little bit harder to see. We thought we could get the helicopters in, but the distraction of having the other Sandy pilot with the bad engine being escorted to Da Nang delayed that capability. So what finally happened was that we had to get him, make sure he was secure, make sure there were no enemy forces around that might threaten him, and we did what we call put him to bed for the night, because we had no capability to rescue during nighttime hours. And as I left the scene, the sun was setting, and I ended up flying back to Da Nang to prepare for the next day's mission, which we knew was going to have to be a first light effort, not only to get Sandy 7 up, but also hopefully Nickel 102, who had been hopefully not affected, because these two sites of the survivors were perhaps less than 5 kilometers apart. So certainly any forces that may have been working toward Nickel 102 actually could have been then moving down toward the new SAR area, which in effect would help that survivor situation out. So we went back to Da Nang and began to plan for the next day's mission. So I think we can end there and then pick up the next day on the next part.
My name is Tim Brady. When I was in Vietnam, I was a first lieutenant, and I retired as a full colonel, 06. Well, this is about the Sandy 7 and the Nickel 102 SAR. I had launched off from Nha Kam Phanom, and I think it was 21 June. I think that's the day, with Larry Heifel as Sandy 7 and 8, and we were headed to Da Nang, which was one of our forward operating locations, and it was just rotation time, and he and I were headed over there. Before we got there, we got diverted to a SAR, and it was Nickel 102. A Navy F-8 pilot had gotten shot down, I guess I would call it, east of the Ashaw in there, and we went in and found him rather quickly. It was very quiet around him. He hadn't heard anything, hadn't heard any, small arms, hadn't heard anything, and, we kind of did a little bit of the Sandy stuff just to see if we could get somebody to react to us being in there, and there was no reaction. And so we said, well, okay, time for pickup. And we orchestrated the pickup, brought the Jolly in, everything went fine, gets into the hover, and one or two enemy, I guess I'd call them, I don't know if they were VC, I don't know if they're NVA, I don't know who they were, started firing small arms at the helicopter. I think that the tail gunner in the helicopter was shot. So anyways, the helicopter pulled off, and we said, okay. So we went back in again, and now we put down some ordnance kind of around and asked him if he'd heard anything, and we couldn't generate any interest in anybody shooting at us. He couldn't hear anything. We said, well, let's do this again. So we brought the helicopter in, and again he gets into the hover and starts taking some light ground fire hitting the helicopter, and he comes off too. So about this time, both Larry Heifel, who is Sandy 7, and myself, we're getting low on fuel. So we've got another two-ship that is coming out of, I think, out of NKP that's going to replace us. So it was time for us to leave. There were thunderstorms off to the west of us, and we said, okay, let's skirt around those, and we'll work our way back towards Da Nang. Whenever we expended aft dispensing CBU, we always had to jettison the CBU canisters, because sometimes a bomblet would hang up in the tube and it would be dangerous to land back there with the airplane. So it was always standard procedure that whenever we had expended CBU, we would jettison the the dispensers or the containers.
Can you tell me what CBU is? For...
It's a cluster bomb unit. We and I forget the nomenclature, but in the A-1 they were aft dispensing. So we would come in over a target, and you would start pickling, and it would start spitting these hand grenade like or cluster bomb units out of the tubes of the container, and of course they hit the ground, blow up. Really effective. Against personnel in particular. And it was part of what we always carried on a Sandy load. So anyways, we're out skirting around this thunderstorm, and we get out over an area, and Larry asked me, he says, "Hey, you still have your canisters?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, let's get rid of them here." I said, "Okay." So, I'm behind him, and I think I see his come off, but I see mine come off, and the world erupted. I mean, there's AAA all over the place. We're going, holy shit. And the next thing I hear is Larry saying, "Hey, I'm hit." I go, oh, this is getting better quickly. So I look up, and sure enough, I can see, red and stuff coming off the back of his airplane. I said, "Yeah, it kind of looks like it's hydraulics." And he says, "No, I'm on fire." I went, "Oh." And he said, "I'm going to have to eject." And I said, "Okay." Or I don't know if I said okay. But I did ask him, I said, "Where are we?" Because, he was the flight lead, and I didn't really know where we were. And so I asked him, I said, "Where are we?" And he said, "I don't know." Boom, out he goes. I watch, I look at him for a second, and I can see the airplane continue on. I see the airplane roll inverted, and I see it, almost to impact. I look back to him, and now the airplane has hit the ground, but there's no smoke. The jungle swallowed it. It's gone. Well, meanwhile, I'm getting hosed left and right too. And he gets on the ground. I'm able to talk to him for a very short period of time. And he said, "You are getting hosed." Well, we left the SAR area originally because we're out of fuel. And I'm pretty much out of fuel too. Big thunderstorm off to the east, which we wanted to stay clear of. I turned into it. Said, "Hell, I just don't want to get shot anymore. I'm going to have to, head back to Da Nang." Well, I finally get up high enough to where, and all of this is happening probably maybe 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet above the ground. We're fairly low. We aren't skimming treetops, but we're low. I finally get up high enough where I can get a tack-and cut off of way. So I come up with a radial and a DME, and I don't remember what they are. And a nail fac comes up, and he said, because, I've called Mayday, 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 Sandy 7's hit, blah, blah, blah. And he says, "Well, what do you see?" And I told him, I said, "Well, when I look off to the east here, no, it would have been to the west. I look off to the west, it looks like there's kind of a, valley and stuff out there, and, I can't." He says, "You're in the Ashaw Valley." He said, "Get out of there." I said, "Okay." So by this time, the other two Sandys have gotten on station, and I'm not real sure who this is at this point. I think it's Byron Hookey, and I'm not sure who he had for a wingman at the time. So, and that may not be right either. It may have been Red Clevenger and Tex Brown, but I think it was. I think Red and Tex had come in, and they were going to work nickel because we hadn't picked them up. But now that Larry's down, that's who they're going to work. And they're able to locate him, but it's getting kind of dark and we don't really have much time. Meanwhile, I've gone back to Da Nang and I've landed there. So at the end of the day, I want to say it was Red Clevenger and Tex Brown and myself, and now Byron has come over, are back at Da Nang. And so we sit down that evening and we say, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be a first light SAR. We'll go in, we'll pick up Sandy 7 first. And then, if we can, because I think we've now probably got other Sandys that are coming at least into the area or at least ready to deploy if they're needed. So we'll pick up Sandy 7 first and then we'll go get Nickel. So we get in and they locate, Sandy 7. We knew where he was. And there's really not much going on. I mean, he's, a fair ways to the east of the ash shaw. You can kind of see the ash shaw, but it's not where we were when we got shot. So there's really not much going on. And so we said, let's go ahead and execute. So we did, picked him up just fine. Now we go over and say, well, what's happening over here with Nickel? And there's nothing going on there either. So, we pick him up. So, we're headed back home, and now we're out feet wet, kind of northeast, I guess, off of Da Nang. And I decide, I need to do a victory roll. So I get to the top of the roll, and all of a sudden, stick won't move. I went, huh. I look down, and I've lost all the hydraulics. I go, So I managed to kind of fall out the bottom of this thing, jettison the rest of the ordnance into the Gulf out there. And I end up landing back at Da Nang with a approach under arrestment because I have no hydraulics, no brakes. I was able to get the gear down just fine. I don't remember whether I had to do anything unusual or what it was. But I did land, arrested landing. The crew, the fire chief at the base comes running out and he says, I'll tell you what, we'll get you out of the wire here and you ride the brakes and we'll tow you back in. I said, no. My flight lead has just gotten picked up. He's at the hospital. I'm out of here. So I left the airplane in the cable. And so I guess, they had pulled it out. And sure enough, there was a bullet hole between, I want to say, the 220 millimeters on the right side, and it had gone in and severed a hydraulic line. We'd had several airplanes get hit in that same location, and it would go into the 20 millimeter box where we had where the ammunition was stored as it fell through, and that could end up being, disastrous. I mean, it just didn't happen that way. So that's pretty much how it happened, I guess. And some aspects of it, it's like it was this morning. I can see Larry's airplane. I can see Larry get out of the airplane. I can see the airplane roll into the ground. I can still see some tracers. And I don't guess I'll ever forget that. Some things that I thought were, in the end when I thought about it, comments like, where are we? And answers like, I don't know. It's just the way it was. Not particularly proud of that. I mean, you ought to know where you are all the time. Larry was highly experienced. He was on an extended tour. He'd been around for a long, long time. We always called him Scary Larry or Quiet Larry because he hardly ever spoke. And when it was very slow. But I don't know where we are. It's just, that stuck. What a horrible answer. But that's what it was, and that's where we were, and that's kind of how I guess it all played out. Because on day 2, I'm flying with Byron, and he is going to lead the Sandy 7 SAR. And then Red Clevenger and Tex are going to be the 2 leads on the Nickel SAR.
We're actually going to pick up on the end of day 1 with the mission planning and what went on and how we decided to line the flight, because it was non-standard. It was because Tim had seen where Larry was shot down. I was the only one who located Larry. Are we filming now?
Yeah, we're running,
Okay.
but you can start.
Right, that's fine. So I was the only one who had physically seen Larry Highfield, Sandy 7's position on the ground. But Tim was with him also, so that made sense that the 2 of us would go out together. However, neither of us had seen Nickel 102, his location, and that our plan was to...
I had seen Nickel Hook.
Okay.
Because, that's what Larry and I were doing first.
Fair enough.
And we got shot off twice before pickup. So.
Okay. So that kind of dictated our lineup for the next day. Our plan was that evening, I got back after dark. I think I was the last one to come back into the command post. You guys had already been there. You had left Bingo, I think, right after Larry was shot down. Mm-hmm. And so we've got Jim Clevenger. We call him Red Man because he was a red-headed guy. His wingman was First Lieutenant Tex Brown. So those 2 stayed together as far as the second day, because those 2 guys RTB'd together, and they really were not any part of the Sandy 7 scenario at that point. So the plan was then I would lead all 4 of us off at a first light effort to first of all get Sandy 7 out, who was again still the least amount of time on the ground as opposed to Nickel 102. After that attempt, whether it be successful or not, we would hope, of course, it would be a successful attempt. We would then switch elements so that the second element that had already seen Nickel 102's position, plus Tim would have seen it. I was the only one that did not have visibility, no pun intended, on the location of Nickel 102. So that brought us up to a very late closing. In my notes, I just read them, and it said we finished about midnight local time at Da Nang, our mission planning, and we were all in agreement on the plan. A 4-ship would launch right after sunlight, and then we would begin our day 2 exercise. One thing I didn't mention yesterday was that we had a nailfac who was known personally to me. His name was Lieutenant Pete Brennan, who happened to be in my F-100 class at Luke Air Force Base. So we're personal friends in addition to being working now all of a sudden on this SAR. Pete normally was based at Nakhon Phanom, but he was TDY, I believe, temporary duty to Da Nang to fill some shortage that they might have had in their availability of pilots. So Pete was airborne on day 1. He went back home to refuel, but he came out first light on day 2 as the beginning of that effort to rescue Sandy 7. So that takes us to the next morning. We get up, we eat breakfast. I put in my notes, I'm not sure how much sleep I got because it was a pretty tense time, and we all knew that the next day was going to be very demanding, intense. So I must have slept some, but it probably wasn't a restful sleep. So we get up, we eat breakfast, we go out to the airplanes, get them ready to go, and we did establish contact with King in flight, who is close enough for us to talk to before we even take off. King being the airborne command post, ABCCC, Airborne Battle Control Center, and they are the ones that are technically the SAR commander. Sandy's, when they get on scene, are called the on-scene command. So they are one level of command lower than the overall mission commander, who is riding in the C-130, the HC-130, that also refuels the Jolly Green helicopters. So they did not participate directly in our planning at night, but I would like to believe that we did transmit our plan to them, either via phone or radio, that we would tell them, that would have advised them that were going to take off as a four-ship. Was technically not the standard way we would do it, but we knew we had to have enough assets airborne. First of all, two airplanes normally would escort the helicopters, and the other two would then go into the SAR area and work, determine if there was any existing threat, because we'd already silenced quite a few of the guns, but we knew that overnight they could have moved in more assets and presented even more problems for us in the morning. So our attempt, we were told by King that they did not want us to launch together. They in fact wanted us to separate our takeoffs by about an hour, and I advised them that that is not the plan we'd briefed, and we fully intend to take off as a four-ship, and that's what we did. So we got no rebuttal from them. Not sure if they were happy about that, but I really at that point didn't care. So we get up early the next morning. This is now 21st of June 1972, and our full intent is to rescue both Sandy 7, an A-1 pilot from the first SOS, who was shot down the day before. Followed after that, we would then attempt a pickup of Nickel 102, an F-8 pilot, Navy F-8 pilot, who was shot down before Sandy 7 was, the day prior. So we begin our taxi out, and we do establish contact with the ABCCC Bird King, who is the rescue commander, to make sure that they understand the plan and not necessarily get permission to take off, but to advise them of what our plan was. And there was some confusion in my mind that they wanted us to take off as two elements of two instead of our plan, our brief plan. So I respectfully advised them that no, that's not our intent. We're going as a four-ship, and that's what we'd briefed, and we're going to continue with that plan. So we launched without any further problem from King, and the flight to the SAR area, the first pickup, was less than an hour. So we flew up the coast. We're about an hour after sunrise, and I immediately established contact with Nail 43, who had launched about an hour before sunrise. So he's been up working for probably between 1 and 2 hours already, working and determining the threat, and had contacted the survivor, make sure he was okay, and he would be, then Sandy 7 would be advised of the plan that was going to unfold very quickly. So we got assurance from Nail 43 that this was the case. They were ready, and he had been putting in some airstrikes on targets down lower in the valley from the general location of where both Larry Sandy 7 had taken his hits from, and the same place that I attacked with my Lao 3s the day prior in the valley. So we felt that made good sense that we continue to hit that area. Plus, it would be far enough from the survivor; it wouldn't interfere with no danger to the survivor. So the plan was, as it usually is, you bring the helicopters in close enough, but not too close. We brought the designated pickup bird closer than the other one. The other one remained feet wet off the coast of South Vietnam. We brought the intended pickup bird closer in. Approximately where Hue Phu Bai is an airfield that the Army used, and so that's, I believe, where we left him, which would leave about a 15, or maybe less than that, 10 to 15 mile run into the survivor. We had him far enough away so that there was no alerting the enemy that there was helicopters in the area, but not too far that it would take an extended period of time. So the other two Sandys stayed with the helicopter, and I believe you came in with me immediately because you hadn't seen Larry's position. So I brought Tim in immediately, and I wanted to make sure that we both knew precisely where he was. So I don't know if you have comments, you can fill in anything I might have omitted.
No, I mean that sounds. I mean that's what we did, and the way you've explained it is the way the way it worked.
That's what I recall, and
Yep.
So we proceeded in and got immediate contact with Sandy 7. He was sounded. This is kind of an aside and a humorous one because we called him. He had a nickname of being very quiet, and I can't. What did we call him? Do you remember?
I don't know, Scary Larry.
Well,
I
Scary
thought.
Larry was something, but that wasn't related to his demeanor, which was, you ask him a question when you're expecting maybe
A sentence.
a sentence, you get no or yes, or you'd get 2 or 3 words. So he wasn't the most verbose person, and there was somebody reminded me of a joke. They said okay, we're flying overhead and we are asking him a question. He says, well, okay, are you injured? Are you in good shape? And you look down and you see him holding the radio, nodding his head, not saying anything. So that's kind of a joke. It wasn't that bad, but he didn't say a lot.
He didn't
So
have
was
much
a
to say.
Pretty quiet guy.
Ever.
So, but he did sound a little bit more upbeat than he did the day before, because now he thought maybe he's got his ticket home. So we proceed in, and as is normally the procedure, we put down a little ordnance, especially on the point above the hill where I had taken some ground fire before, and determine whether there's any reaction to that. And I believe what I remember is that Sandy 7 reported that he could hear some ground fire down below us. So that might indicate troops were coming up the hill from the valley floor. Now there was also a road that there was a break in the valley wall just south of where Larry was. That was an opening that there was actually a road that we could see, and it could have also been the channel for bringing additional troops up from the east into that area. So that may in fact be what happened, because we did meet some resistance. We both took ground fire. I took some ground fire from not above, but this time probably below, because every time we'd come by, Larry would report that he could hear people shooting at us. And Tim, you also, I think, saw some ground fire, or at least felt the effects of it, because you did ultimately take some battle damage on that first part of the pickup. So we, it didn't take too long. We had pretty much isolated what we thought was the biggest threat, and we had sanitized the area. The plan was to bring the Jolly Green in from the Way area, which would have put him on a heading of about maybe 210, a southwesterly heading, which would have kept him separated from the valley, not in the valley, over some isolated terrain which we had not had any enemy response from. So that we felt was the safest area to bring him in. So the next step was to, Tim went out and picked up the helicopter. Before we brought him in, he brought in the other 2 Sandys so that they could see where the location was, so that now all of a sudden we would have all 4 people knowing where the survivor was, and so they could then expend ordnance in support of the pickup. After that step was done, the other 2 went out, got the helicopter, and we alerted Sandy 7 to get ready, and he said, have your flare ready and get it out and ready. We're going to be executing, and there should be a helicopter arriving overhead in maybe a minute or so. So we got him ready. We gave the execute command, and the helicopter's coming in, and at that point, one thing I forgot to talk about is that as Tim was out getting the other 2 Sandys out, I was continuing to make low passes, and I was at the bottom of one of my passes pulling up into the higher terrain, and all of a sudden my engine quit, which sounds drastic. It is drastic, but normally that's the way we know that our external fuel tanks are empty. So the normal procedure is to pull the power back, put the fuel boost pump on, and reach down and put the selector to main. Unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury because I was up, high terrain was approaching. I was afraid if I pulled the power back and went through those procedures, I wouldn't have enough speed to clear the terrain. So I left the power full forward, or as far forward as it was, switched to main, and the engine caught quite quickly and abruptly, which oversped the RPM of 2,800 RPM by about 100 or 150 up to almost 3,000 RPM, which is an overspeed, which is a write-up. But at this point, I was happy it caught, and it may have been the extra thrust that got me over the ridge. So that was a pucker, to be sure, something that got my full attention. And it's one of those things that, oh shit, type minutes that you regret, but everything was running fine. I checked the engines and they worked fine. Engine instruments, rather. So that very quickly was followed by the approach of the other 2 Sandys, showed them the location. We got made sure Larry was still on frequency, which he was. So we began the final phase, which is the execute phase. Went back out, picked up the helicopters. I went out also, and then led. Typically, Sandy 1 will get in front of the helicopters. They follow him in. I fly right to the survivor. I give him a countdown on seconds, and 15 seconds, 10 seconds, slow down, and then pop your smoke. And then that's led by about, and quickly, in my report anyway, in my journal, the smoke comes up through the opening in the trees in the helicopter. If it all works perfectly, it's right there in front of him. So he maneuvered himself into the wind and entered a hover, and it seems to me, it always seems like it takes 10-15 minutes, but it was like probably a very quick pickup, as I recall. He hovered, stabilized. PJ went down because there was some entanglement. I think that they did it for safety's sake, and there was some equipment. I wrote in my journal that there was some the cord or something. I'm not sure which cord I was talking about, but there was a need for a PJ to go down. It wasn't an injury, but they quickly got Larry on the hoist and brought him up, and I think the PJ probably came up on the other seat. There's a penetrator that they both could come up together, and I think that's probably what happened in this case. And there we are. We got Sandy 7 out, and so that ended phase 1. One thing that we had to be aware of, and perhaps I wasn't as aware as I should have been, is that when we were switching roles, typically Sandy 1 and 2, the low Sandys will be expending more ordnance than the high Sandys, because they're just coming in. They may only expend if needed, which really was what we wanted, because I was switching leads, and so I was going to then become Sandy 3, the high Sandy on the second pickup. But I'd used quite a bit of ordnance, and that came into play later when we went to get Nickel 102. So what we did was escort the helicopter with the survivor on board out to the coast, picked up by one of the Sandys, and I believe they must have held, because we needed all 4 Sandys to run the second part of the SAR. So they stayed out over feet wet. They were all good. They had no problems, no battle damage, and the second helicopter that was in that 2-ship then became the pickup for the second phase of the flight. We switched leads. Red Clevenger took over as SAR lead at this point, and Tim and I became the high Sandy, where we went out and held with the helicopter until the other 2 Sandys made the area ready for, and so we basically just reversed that whole procedure. Nickel 102, as I remember, came up on the radio quite quickly. He had been waiting patiently, and probably with some amount of anxiety, but we went through the same process again, determine if there's a threat, any new threat that might have emerged overnight, and we proceeded to wait. I think we must have held maybe 10 or 15 minutes out until they had determined that the area was safe to bring the second helicopter in. But they brought us in first because Tim had seen Nickel 102's position. I don't know if he had moved or not. Tim, do you remember?
He hadn't moved.
Okay. And but I hadn't seen it, so they brought it in, and I was able to see the survivor's location. I don't remember if there was a chute there that we could see, or if it was just simply land terrain features that they were describing where he was. I don't remember to that level of detail, but typically you do need to know where the survivor is. All 4 do, so that if you're putting ordnance down, there's no chance at all that you are going to inadvertently drop ordnance on the guy you're trying to rescue. So that's very important. So we kind of bided our time a bit and waited for the second phase of the SAR to proceed with Red Clevenger, who was an experienced flight lead, Sandy lead captain, a very capable guy, and flew with him quite a few times, and I was always impressed with his demeanor and the way he executed. So as we proceed inbound, we get the word that it's, or not inbound, but we're orbiting, we get the word that they're ready to go. And Tim, have I missed anything that, something that we're doing okay? So we get the execute call. We after we've come in to see the survivor's location for me and Tim to refresh his memory, we run the helicopter in, Redman and Tex lead the charge. Okay, so we execute, and the other two Sandys are leading the charge in, and Tim and I are bringing up the rear with the helicopter, and we enter what's called a daisy chain, where we take separation, and each of us gets into a large. So in a perfect scenario, you'd have somebody on east, north, west, and south all at all times, so each could react to a given threat. And so we entered that daisy chain, and I think we were taking some ground fire. At least we were expending ordnance. And it didn't take long for me to figure out that I had no more ordnance. I had expended a lot of ordnance on the first part of the SAR, and so I think I might have made a total of let's say 5 or 6 passes on this phase of the SAR, the last 2 of which were dry, which is a very uncomfortable feeling, to make a pass, not be dropping anything, because that's well, it may intimidate them by keeping their heads down, or it may say, oh, he's empty, he's got no ammunition. So anyway, that's what happened, and from my perspective, that second part went almost as smoothly as the first part. We had a quick, the penetrator went down. I don't know whether they put PJ down on the ground this time, but it didn't take long. But you've got a survivor coming up the cable, and is on board, and they typical call is, okay, survivors on board, let's get the hell out of here, which is a great way to get going the correct direction. So everybody exited basically due east toward the water, and we're all happy. I mean, as this is the first time, and I think only time, that I remember during that whole year that we had a double pickup like that of 2 separate survivors from 2 different airplanes. Now it's I think we might have had a pickup of 2 F4 crews together that were close together that went down at the same time, but this was not that. It was unique in that there were 2 separate shoot downs, 2 separate airplanes, and we brought it all together and made it happen on day 2, which was a great feeling. So we were quite happy, elated coming out of the area. We were maybe doing some whifferdills and just really pretty happy about it, until Tim says, Hook, I've got a problem. My flight controls are getting stiff. And then we determined pretty quickly that he had taken some battle damage, which might have impacted the wing. I'm guessing there's hydraulic lines that go out to the wing. It's the softer part of the airplane, and if you break one of those lines, then you bleed the hydraulic system out, and impacts flight controls. It also impacts ability to get the gear down. Which in this case, I don't remember if you used alternate gear, or did you have enough?
I don't remember, Byron.
Yeah, but the bottom line is we declared an emergency. He jettisoned his remaining ordnance, his fuel tanks, and went back to Da Nang on an emergency approach, and put down the hook and took the approach end barrier. He did get the gear down, whether it was normal or alternate. But so that was the end of his mission, but it was the end of all our missions. So we held while he landed, cleared the runway, and we all came in, and I'll never forget coming in to see both survivors on the ramp, the Navy F-8 pilot and Larry, who we all knew. He was one of us. So there were a lot of hugs going on, and I'll never forget what the survivor, the Nickel 102 survivor, said. Hey, I want to talk to the flight lady. Did her great job. And I said, well, that was me. And so he said, well, you're only a first lieutenant. I said, well, yeah, that's what it is.
See, that's one of the things. I don't know if you caught it while we were talking about this. But what do you have running this SAR? The FAC, First Lieutenant Pete Brennan. Sandy Lead, First Lieutenant Byron Hookey. His wingman, First Lieutenant Tim Brady. In the other flight, you do have Captain Red Clevenger, and his wingman is First Lieutenant Tex Brown.
Yeah.
I don't think things like that happen anymore. I mean, it was remarkable that that's what you had for a lineup. And, Hook could tell you the same thing. When a SAR kicked off, we owned the war. We could get just about anything. And you got these lieutenants that have been flying maybe 18 months, maybe 2
Right.
years. They're running this war. And that's just the way that it was, and there wasn't any question about
Right.
that. And you know, and Hook, when he said, well, he, I forget the exact word he used, but he kindly advised King that we were going to execute his plan. It wasn't that kindly. It was, hey, we've got a plan. We're going to execute the plan. That's it. And on King, there's probably at least Lieutenant Colonel,
Oh yeah.
and
Well, they
that
weren't
was just remarkable.
If they wanted to vote, they should have been at the meeting.
Exactly.
So-
And then we would have overridden your vote if we didn't like it to begin
Right,
with.
yeah.
But
So it's one of those gambles you take. It really wasn't. We didn't think much of a gamble. It was a plan. We were all on board, and it executed and went.
As planned.
Couldn't have gone better.
yeah.
Some minor battle damage. I had a hole in my airplane, as I recalled in my journal I wrote down, and he had some battle damage. I don't know about the other two, but it was a win.
It was a win.
You had mentioned it was a good feeling. Can each one of you describe what it was like briefly when you rescued somebody and you brought them back? I mean, there had to be terrible days. That had to be the highest of the high when you rescued somebody compared to the low. But could you describe?
Well, it's just that you've got so much adrenaline flowing with the first part, the uncertainty of have you killed all the threat, or is it still out there, or are you putting the helicopter at risk by bringing him in and then in a hover? A non-moving target's easiest one to hit. So those are the things that you have to weigh, and it's judgment. It's very subjective, and you have to just, the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. But there's always this time when you can make that mistake, and we said, oh gosh, God, please don't make it be this day. And when it goes well, then there's just this full release. The tension seems to disappear. You're just jubilant. It's just elation.
And it's probably as easy to look at it on the backside. And by that I mean when you didn't get them. That was a long flight home.
Yep.
And that was a very quiet, solemn debrief where nobody felt good about anything.
And we've both experienced both those.
Right. And so when it worked, you go, man,
Yeah.
doesn't get any better than
No,
this.
this is it. That's right.
Yeah.
But I think I might have mentioned before is that I tried and I learned over time that you don't want to get way too high on the high points, and you don't want to drop too low when things didn't go well. The irony of this mission is it was 2 days after, or 3 days after I flew with Major Zeke Encinas, who was the only man we lost in the war, and I was his wingman when he died. So that was the bottom. This was close to being the top after that.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or add to this?
Hook, it was 48 years ago.
Yeah, it's not
Good
that long
God.
ago. It seems like yesterday.
It does.
Some of these memories are always going to be there.
Yep.
And it's good that they're the good ones, but unfortunately that's sometimes accompanied with the ones that you don't want to remember, but that's the way life is.
Yeah.
48 years. My gosh.
I
And
didn't
you
think
guys-
we were that old. I guess we are.
Well, you are.
Huh? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're just a young guy.
Yeah.
Again, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.